the Financial Survival Network, helping you to survive and thrive in the new economy. Get your free financial survival toolkit and find out where to buy gold and silver safely at great prices. Sign up at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. This is the Financial Survival Network.
1490 WGCH. This is Kerry Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network, which is brought to you by Miles Franklin. Been in business selling gold since 1980. Go to milesfranklin.com or call them at 800-822-8080 and get a free quote. New bailout in Europe, gold prohibited from crossing that $1,600 mark, and we've got LIBOR Gate, where everybody's doing it, so what's the problem? And to discuss all that, got Ranting Andy Hoffman and his colleague, Bill Holter. Hey, Andy, how are you?
I'm doing great. Another hot day in Colorado.
Oh, it's hot in New York, too. And Bill, I know it's hot in Texas, that's for sure.
Yeah, but actually it cooled down a little bit this last week. Unbelievable, huh?
Really, because it's been in the 90s in New York, which is, for early July, it's not unheard of, but it's unusual. And even today, it's still, the heat's pretty up there. And the heat's up on these financial markets too, aren't they? Isn't it, Andy?
Yeah, well, we've seen, the prototypical reaction to, the stocks, the financial stocks go down. So the European ministers or the Fed heads pretend that they've done something. And I'm still waiting for any kind of validation that this Spanish bank bailout happened, let alone this one from Friday for the entire Europe, where nothing has happened other than they made an announcement that they're going to do something. There's a lot of people have to ratify it, and some may or may not. We don't even know how much money it will be. It reminds me just like back in late October when they announced a Greek bailout, which never really happened. And, the half-life on these new plans is less and less. And I expect that we'll be back in a disaster scenario shortly.
Yeah, because we never really get out of one, right, Bill?
Well, and where does the money come from? I mean, this is getting, each one gets bigger and bigger. I mean, now we're on Spain. In a week or two, it'll be Italy. It'll be France. Where does the money come from?
Exactly. So,
and when they create the money, what does that do? It on the other side of the balance sheet, you're creating a liability. So it's not fixable. It is not fixable because the money has to come from somewhere. And there is no money to do it with.
And these bailouts, Kerry, all they do is add debt to balance sheets. I mean, I think a lot of people, because of the ambiguity of these announcements, believe that somehow, even if there was money to give out, that they somehow believe, like Greece or Spain, is actually getting money to reduce debt. All they're doing is getting more debt. So if the problem was too much debt in the first place, then how is more debt going to help? And if you look today, look on Zero Hedge, a list of all of the nations of the world, their purchasing managing index. Almost everyone is negative now, contracting. And the United States joined that this morning with their first contracting PMI number probably since 2008.
Amazing, huh? And there's no Santa Claus. There's nobody here that can write this check. And once people realize that, they're going to head for the doors, but they're clinging on to that belief to the last possible moment. And it reminded me, like a couple of weeks ago, I love that show, House Hunters. And, I really like to watch it. I just, I guess it's just I like to buy stuff. And when I watch people buy stuff, it brings me pleasure. But I made the mistake of believing that it was real. And I read an article that it's a put-up job. It's a scam that oftentimes people have bought the house already, and then they'll pick several houses from the neighborhood, some of which aren't even for sale, and they'll put price tags on them, and they'll make you believe that this is like a bake-off, and you pick the one that tastes the best. And I kind of felt like what I felt like when I learned there was no Santa Claus. You know, it's like, how could they do this to me? And that's what the world is in for, right, Bill? This wake-up call that there's no Santa Claus, there's no real house hunters, that the only thing about reality TV is that people actually really watch it, but everything else is contrived. It's a put-up job. It's a scam, just like the world economy, right, Bill?
Well, you say there is no Santa Claus. People are going to find out there is no white knight this time. Back in 2008, at the latter half of the year, everybody thought the government will never let it happen, it being a complete collapse. And the governments doubled down on their bets, and they put their balance sheets on the line. I mentioned this last week. There are no white knights this time. There's nobody with the wherewithal that can step up and save the system. The way I see it, the only way that these black deflationary balance sheet holes can be filled is to mark up the price of gold, because that does not create a liability on the other side of the balance sheet.
Hey, and that's a good point, because we see that under the Basel Accord, gold is going to be a tier 1 asset, no discount, no haircut on it. And the Fed has a discussion paper put forth to comply with that. And my feeling is like, okay, so JP Morgan or one of the majors says they have gold, so does GLD, so does the U.S. government. How is all that going to be proved and policed? And are we in just for another scam on this? What's your thought, Andy?
Well, first off, I'm still floored about House Hunters, because my wife, it's her favorite show, so I wind up watching it all the time. And I got to tell you, I got to tell you, watching it, I've had lots and lots of questions in my mind about how things work perfectly, how they look at 3 houses, how it's so methodical. And so by you telling me that, it's one of these perfect examples of a fraud that's being committed right under your nose. And as Bill wrote in his piece today, you know there's something wrong, but you can't put your finger on it.
Exactly.
And then all of a sudden you connect the dots and realize, he called Bill's piece is Connect the Dots. You realize that House Hunters is no different than LIBOR, or as you say, GLD having gold. Because I mean, that is just a perfect example of how the world is hoodwinked. And, you know, wait till I tell my wife about this. But I'm on a roll now.
She's going to cry, man. Don't tell her. Let her keep the illusion going.
No,
I'm so pissed there's no Santa Claus.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you a funny story about that. In kindergarten, my brother went and told the whole class, because he was upset about something with the teacher, that there was no Santa Claus. And they all started crying. And this teacher came to my mother like, how dare your son tell them the truth? How dare he? So yeah, it goes on and on.
Right now, as you say, the piece I'm writing for tomorrow is called "In God We Trust," and I'm talking about for a nation, that purports to have separation of church and state. Why you put "In God We Trust" on the dollars, or why in a classroom, how a teacher can go to a kid's parents and say, how can you say there's no Santa Claus, as if it's like a law that there's a Santa Claus? So there's just so many cross currents of misinformation that are going around in the world. And, you know, you bring up the tier 1 thing with the Basel Accords, and I'm not an expert on Basel Accords and how all this works. It's basically a bunch of, Bank of International Settlements and a bunch of, high level bankers making up garbage stuff. But the fact is, there's a reason why that this is being brought up. And again, it's right under our noses, because you know that the establishment is terrified of something like gold being a tier 1 asset. Yet it's in the news. It's being talked about. There's something behind it. I just don't know what.
And we're going to find out soon enough. And
I have an idea.
Yeah, let's hear it, Bill.
My thought is, I mean, they're bringing it back into the system.
Ooh, but
it's pure and simple.
Is this
they're bringing it back into the system to revalue it? As I mentioned, I think the only way to fill up all the losses, all the black holes that have been created in derivatives, central bank balance sheets, you name it. The only way to fill in those holes is to revalue gold higher. If you revalue gold higher, now all of a sudden these entities that have gold have replenished their wealth without the addition of liability or debt on the other side. It's like when you give money to Spain, A, somebody's got to create it, and B, Spain eventually has to pay it back. But if you revalue I think they've got 500 and some odd tons, you revalue gold tenfold or 100-fold or whatever, you just bail them out. And that's why I think Basel is as they well should do, making gold a tier 1 asset, because it is money. But I think what they're doing is they're bringing it back into the system for the revaluation.
But the big question is, who has the gold? Now, Bill and I, being from GATA backgrounds, believe that a lot of the U.S. gold, for instance, has been swapped or leased out. For all we know, it's still sitting in U.S. vaults and not owned. And maybe Jim Rickards is right. We plan to just take it, even if it's not ours. But the big question, of course, is who has the gold when it is revalued?
Yeah, well, I know what you're saying, but if we go back on a gold-backed system, that's going to mean no more social programs, which is going to mean wholesale house cleaning of every government in the world that's a so-called democracy, because that's what they specialize in. And just going back to the reality TV show analogy, because I think, Andy, it's really a great one. It's a real metaphor for how we go through life, how we view government, and how you really look at what's real and what isn't. There's a show called Pawn Stars, and they come in, the guy's got a copy of the Declaration of Independence, the original one. And this guy behind the counter, who is no constitutional scholar, no historian, he knows everything about it. He knows this book, and it came from here and the paper. And there's just no way that the guy knows all this. So obviously they write up a script for him when some interesting item comes in. And then he's an expert. And, oh, gee, I'm so impressed by this guy who runs a pawn shop in Vegas. So they have this other guy there who's kind of like the court jester, this guy Chumley, who weighs about 600 pounds. And he definitely, we'll put it charitably, he's slow. Now, Chumley's an expert in everything that walks in the door, whether it's a 15th or 16th century compass off a ship, or telecommunications equipment from World War II that they used to, use for the launch codes, whatever it is, this guy knows everything. So it's gotten to the point where it's absurd, where you just look at everything and know that it's just a construct of lies. And that's what we're really dealing with here. And that's what makes me skeptical about going back to gold, because gold ineffectively would be stripping off the veil, and it would be exposing the truth for what us three know it to be already.
Well, but then it goes back to the people making the rules, these Basel rules. I believe it's the Bank of International Settlements, which is supposedly this central bank of central banks. And they are, they supposedly have some gold, and they seem to be behind all the suppression efforts. They were on the gold sale headline back in December that they were selling. So I don't really know who these people are that are in charge and what their angle is. For all we know, they aren't even friends with the people that we think are the people who run it. And, Bill could be right. I just don't know. But the fact is that the fact that we're discussing this right now shows that someone is bringing this into play in some way, shape, or form, because this is no small announcement if they made this.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something afoot. We don't know what it is, but they're going to be telling us shortly. And whatever it is, it's not good for paper-backed assets, is it? Do you think, Bill?
Well, Kerry, the social programs are going to go away anyway. They're going to have to some extent. There's no way that they're going to be able to give money out as fast as it depreciates. And I read an article on Friday where the U.S. is actually wanting to put more and more people on food stamps, on whatever the cards, the EBT card or whatever it's called.
Yep.
Because they view it as a form of stimulus to the economy.
Real wealth creation going on there, huh?
Come on. Yeah, really.
Yeah,
the bottom line is our standard of living. The U.S. has the furthest to fall in the standard of living because we're the furthest away from what our true, production capacity is.
Yeah, no doubt. It's definitely a wake-up call coming. And the only other option is totally hyperinflating the currency and watching, mass civil unrest sweep the globe. I mean, that really is the choice.
Well, Bill mentioned there are no white knights, but the fact is, of course, there's white knights. They're everywhere. They're called printing presses. They're the same white knights that were there 4 years ago. The only problem is that we've seen the law of diminishing returns over these past 4 years because every new thing they do, they get less out of. Frankly, they're not getting anything out of these new announcements. I mean, yeah, they got 1 day of the stock market going up. But the fact is, the more that they try to use these white knights, the more they destroy themselves. And I think that what I've been calling for sometime, maybe in the next 6 months or so, is the point where the market calls them on these QE announcements because they don't help anyone. They help a few people at the top. But at some point, people are going to realize that it doesn't help the average business for there to be inflation. It barely helps banks for that matter. I mean, yeah, they get some money they get some money put on their balance sheet, but for the most part, no one benefits from these. And I think at some point very soon, the money printing announcements are going to result in major drops in the markets like we saw after the Spanish bank bailout announcement.
Yeah, well, this leads me back to an old Samuel Johnson quote, and believing that these guys can fix this stuff is the triumph of, it's like a second marriage, the triumph of hope over experience. And that's where we're at now. And I don't see anything stopping it. It's, I don't know, Bill, do you see anything to stop the onslaught?
They're playing the QE card behind the scenes. They're not doing it publicly. If they were to do the last meeting last week or the week before, if they were to announce a public QE and the market sold off 500 or 1,000 points and gold was up $200, $300, $400, where would we be today? Everything would be closed because they would have lost control. It's a paper bluff. And the central banks having their bluff called, that's the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that note, this is the end of our little round table here. But Andy and Bill, thank you for coming on. And go to milesfranklin.com, sign up for the blogs, and good place to go for purchasing metals, because if 1/10 of what Bill expects comes true, it's going to blow the price of metals through the roof.
And if I can make one final comment, Kerry, you've been saying in your promos for us, they buy, you ship. Well, I wrote a rant today. You'll see it later this afternoon, which uses that as my motto. So
all right, cool. So on that note, guys, next week we'll try to get together again. And thanks for coming on.
All right. Enjoyed it.
Have a good one.
You too.